Hello and welcome back. Today I am joined by Wayne Diesel, sports physiotherapist. So Wayne, thank you for joining. I've not seen you for, I think it probably is before you moved to Miami. So great to see you again.
Yeah, Andy, thank you very, very much. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very honored to be on the podcast talking and hopefully sharing some of my experiences with other physios and perhaps motivating them to seek similar paths, because I feel very blessed in the path that I've had and the opportunities that I've been given.
Brilliant. No, great. Well, it definitely will be, because you've got a really interesting background. So if we start at the beginning then, so where are you from originally?
Andy, I was born in South Africa, a city called Johannesburg. That's where I went to school. I did my physiotherapy education at the Witwatersrand University. It was quite an interesting procedure because I didn't start in physiotherapy. I'd always wanted to be a dentist for whatever reason. And then in South Africa, at the stage that I was in South Africa as a white male, we had to do 2 years of national duty in the military. And I became a medic, and I had experience and exposure to dentists. And then I had a look in other people's mouths. I thought everyone had similar mouths like we've got, but it wasn't the case at all. And I decided that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life looking inside people's mouths and doing that work. So I shelved that, and then I gave it a bit more thought. I've got 4 brothers, all either engineers or computer scientists. My father was an engineer. So I decided I wanted to go the route of perhaps computer science. I decided that I did 2 years of computer science before I started physiotherapy. And again, I felt that, I didn't want to sit at a desk working on a computer all the time. I preferred the interaction with people. And my dad actually had a good friend as the physiotherapist who was lecturing at the time. He said, why don't you go and speak to her, see if it's something that you're interested in. And I did, and I got accepted into physiotherapy, and the rest is history, basically. But it was an interesting path. But I think having 2 years of military duty, starting my computer science, it allowed me to settle rather than going straight into a course. It gave me an opportunity to really analyze and look at where I went. And perhaps I was a little bit maturer when I went into physiotherapy school, looking at it from those angles. And again, I don't think today I would change anything. People say, well, you wasted 4 years, you could have been working, you could have been earning. But I'm very happy. I think it grounded me. It gave me views into other people's lives, the way other things work. And I think that's important. And maybe that's also what influenced me to go seeking other opportunities all over the world.
Yeah, no, I think a couple of people have brought up that having a career, not that was a career beforehand, but having experience before moving into that world does give you extra experience and understanding and maybe appreciation for what you read.
I agree, and I think that's something that the modern physios and a lot of young people today, they're just so desperate to get into work, to climb up the ladder, and instead of taking the time to get that experience. And the same applies in sports physio. I look at even my history in sports physio, where I didn't start out as a physiotherapist saying I'm going to become a sports physiotherapist. I just opened it up and saw what came out, and that actually the way that I became a interested in sport, shall I say, is through a motorbike accident. I was coming back from, I used to represent my university vids in football, soccer as we called it in South Africa, and coming home just before one of the inter-university tournaments, and I had a bike accident, and I had a thoracic spinal fracture and things in that day, so I couldn't play in the tournament. But because I was a big part of the team, they asked me to be the physio for the team during the upcoming tournament. And I really loved it. I said, this is it. This is what I want to do. So again, it shows you out of adversity sometimes comes something positive. And I think, again, had that not happened, maybe I wouldn't have persevered or got into sports physio. And, at that time, it was an interesting time in South Africa where we were just about coming out of apartheid. Things were coming to an end. So, the international sport was unheard of in South Africa. It was all provincial, as we call it then, so playing in the various provinces within South Africa. But we hadn't yet branched out into international sport. So there wasn't really the demand for professional sports physios. And I was there at the right time because then the search was on, they needed people. And again, fortunately for me, it was a male-dominated environment at that stage, looking for males to work in sports physiotherapy. And again, in our class, there were 4 males and 28 females as a physio. So my chances, and 2 or 3 of those physios weren't interested in sport. So really, they didn't have much of an option. And again, I was very blessed and very fortunate to be in that situation. I'm glad to see that things have opened up and there's a lot more diversity. But that allowed me into the opportunity. So before I knew it, I was working with national sports bodies, gymnastics, cricket. So basically, wherever I went to, they said, Wayne, please, we need a physio and we need someone. So I got into all sorts of different sports right at an early age. And that, again, gave me that insight into the different sporting events, whether it was Commonwealth Games, Olympics, and whatever else. I was able to touch on that. And I think that, again, opened up my eyes to what different sportsmen do, what they don't do, whether it's gymnastics, field hockey, cricket, archery, swimming, you name it. You know, there was a desperate need for physiotherapists to start working in the profession. And again, I just certainly rode that wave.
Yeah, so it was right place, right time for it, which yeah, is great. And again, a lot of other people that have made it to the top of it is like, yeah, we're very lucky. But again, you make your own luck in terms of those things. And just going back to in terms of Johannesburg, just from a personal perspective, like I was meant to be in South Africa a couple of times, but COVID put an end to that. But like Johannesburg, like that's, you know, you hear a lot of stories around there. What was it like growing up in Johannesburg?
Again, I was extremely blessed. You know, and certainly we had white privilege, and whatever people say, it's exactly what it is. We had our schooling, we had everything done, we had fantastic houses, we had huge open places, we had sports fields, we had everything open to us. So again, very, very fortunate. And again, you know, part of what I'm trying to do is maybe put back into some of that environment, help with the younger black athletes, the younger black physios to come through now and give them the opportunities that were given to me, only because of this color of my skin and my sex. So there was things that I benefited from, probably more so than others, just because of the position that I was in and what I found. So, you know, I love Johannesburg. I still go there. We have family there. We go back and visit. We have the national game parks that we love. I love wild animals. So it's part of a good break, which is unique in a lot of senses. You know, there's not a lot of countries that you can go to see lion roaming wild, elephant.
Has things changed? Like, have things changed in terms of like the black-white divide?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, completely. From when I was growing up to where there's now, you know, there's a stronger and stronger black middle class that is developing. They are starting to open business. Things are starting to happen for them. So certainly, I think things are hopefully improving for the better. Unfortunately, there's still a large amount of poverty and issues going on there. And that's going to take time. You know, look at what's happened and how many years it took to get them to that. You can't just suddenly open it up and expect things to be okay. We just have to support them and give them time. But, you know, I'm optimistic about it, Andy. I really think that there's a great future for that country. There's a lot of dedicated people there. You know, there's going to be issues, but hey, tell me which country hasn't got issues. I've lived in the US and in the UK, and I look at what's going on at the moment. So it's not very different wherever you are. But I think, you know, let's hope things turn around, because, you know, what Nelson Mandela did for that country and things like that is truly amazing. We have so much diversity there, and that diversity, you know, is wonderful. I just watched South Africa, the cricketers beat India in the international 5-day test as well as a 1-day test. So they still got a very strong thing. The Blitzbokke, which is this rugby sevens team, the Springboks just won. They beat Argentina in the final. So, you know, they're doing well. They're holding their own, and there's a tremendous amount of talent and depth there. And through sport, I think, you know, certainly when we won the Rugby World Cup back in '96, how that changed South Africa. They've just got to keep using sport to help change and to help show people that it's acceptable. We can live together, you know, and we can be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's great to hear then if you can see that there has been huge changes over there. Yeah. So coming back to your career then, so you'd got involved in sport, whether it's, you know, a little bit of luck, but you took advantage of that. So at that point, did you have a vision of where you wanted to go with it?
Not really, you know, and maybe that's the thing that I try and explain to people. I had no vision when I was just graduated that I'm going to go to San Antonio and work in basketball in the NBA. I had no idea I was going to work in Gloucester Rugby. None of those things even came to. All I was focused on is where I am at the moment. And I think I I bided my time waiting for the right opportunities rather than committing myself and say, I'm going to do this one day and this is going to be my ultimate goal. So what I ended up doing is I went and did my PhD in exercise physiology with Knox in Cape Town. And again, that sort of strengthened a lot. And again, I think I was fortunate because I was in a unique-ish situation where I was a physiotherapist and I had a PhD in exercise physiology. So those two gave me, the next level of getting into sports teams where, again, the rugby teams and that, because I had the dual qualifications, I was able to help on the exercise side of it as well. It gave me a lot of insight into what the athletes did, what they needed. So again, it's tough coming into an environment where you don't fully understand the stresses and strains on the athletes. But having that, you can communicate. And then once you become, and I was again fortunate to be head of the departments in various elite teams, but then I could communicate. I wasn't an expert in exercise physiology training of NFL players or basketball players or whatever for that matter, but it didn't matter because I could understand and I could accept what they were doing and listen to them and understand the GPS trackings and things and heart rate variability, whatever else is, but then stick to my own. Equally, I could then talk to the doctors about diagnosing potential plans, scanning players, signing players, whatever else. And again, it was being able to sit on both sides and then get the experts in and not try and be the expert myself and make decisions myself, but rather get outstanding people to come and work with me and then giving them the freedom to make the decisions, but taking the management side of it away from them and saying, okay, let me deal with this. Let me try and put together teams of people that can work cohesively and then not work in silos, which has been such a problem for so long and in so many teams. And I think that was probably one of the biggest successes that I had, is not so much that I was the guru and I had to do all the treatments, but just get the right people in and give them the opportunities to do what they can do.
And so was that something that you had in mind when you moved over? So Gloucester was your first role in the UK?
Yes, Gloucester was the first role. I'd been working with the Springbok rugby team ahead of that. So I had a little bit of exposure coming to the UK. My brother had just moved to Gloucester a few years before that. And he introduced me to some of the hierarchy just because I was in the Springbok. So in between some of the games, I'd go down and watch some of the games. I got to know some of the front office, the admin staff at Gloucester Rugby. And then next thing they contacted me and said, Wayne, look, there's an opportunity. We really want to develop and grow our team. We believe that there's a huge amount of potential. And again, I must stress that I left South Africa for good reasons. It wasn't that, we had terrible things happening to us and I hated it and I had to get out of it. It was just a case of, look, I want to expose my family to other options. What does the rest of the world look like? Having been in South Africa for so many years and isolated and stuck into things, I was desperate to try and go out and explore. And also now that I've been the head physio with the Olympics, Commonwealth Games, All Africa Games, Bafana, which is a national soccer team, the rugby teams, and I just said, look, I've got to move. I've got to go and put myself against others and see whether, I am this person that can meet with these challenges. I want to go and put myself. So it was interesting. And it was, again, part of a whole wonderful journey, where I could then go and say, right, I want to become someone else. I want to put myself into difficult situations that I don't necessarily understand. But then again, using the same principles, I'm not going to come the expert. I'm not the one that's going to tell them how to play basketball, how to play football, how to play tennis, whatever it is. I'm going to be there to support. And I think that's stood me in good stead over the years, where it's rather than trying to pretend that you know what you do. It's more about, okay, let me see if I can help with the support staff. Let the coaches do the coaching. I will do the medical side of it and look after the players. Sure, there's a lot of learning. Every sport's different. The demands are different. The injuries are different. But that's the exciting thing. And that's what's open to physios. If they can go and look at. And I didn't want to just become a single-minded, one sport only physio. And I respect those people that do it. I think it's wonderful to have 25, 30 years in one sport in a career. I just decided I wanted that diversity. I wanted to go out and experience different cultures, different continents, put myself into positions where it's challenging. It's not the easiest thing walking into an NFL team when you know nothing about the NFL. But, I certainly, again, as I said earlier, I certainly don't regret that. And I think anyone that's interested in doing it, I'd encourage you to look at those opportunities.
So in terms of that, so how long, I mean, for one, starting out representing South Africa, I can imagine would be a massive honour across a number of those different sports. So how long were you, how did you get involved in working at the national level, and how long did that last?
So it certainly lasted when, basically, when did I graduate? 87. Then I did my PhD. I got my PhD in 91, 92-ish. So it was around about that time, and in between that time, I started already working with national organizations, with gymnastics, women's gymnastics. And again, because of the national team body, then there was games. Then I started going with that, because then they'd nominate me as a physio potentially to go with the national teams. Then when I did that, it was again, then football came to me, then it was rugby, because some of the directors of medicine in those organizations, like SAFRU, which is South African Rugby Union, they were the ones that were also working with the Commonwealth Games or the All Africa Games. So because of my contact with that, they then brought me into that. So it's like anything, it's a people business, Andy. You know, we are involved in the people business. If you don't get involved with working with people, you don't have a business, basically. So again, it's not just about smooching up and getting with people, but you have to have those people skills. And I think that's one thing that as physios we need to become better at, is actually having those personal skills, working on the personal side, the soft touches, the EQ rather than IQ.
Yeah, so then you talked about the move to Gloucester then. So how was that transition, both in terms of moving into a one sport full time, but also moving country? How did you find that?
Yeah, it was certainly challenging, because again, coming from South Africa, going into Gloucester, it's a unique experience. Our kids had to adapt, because they were, youngish, but they were still at school. So the school terms in South Africa start in January and end in December, but the school terms here are different. So they start at different ages. So we had to then transition from the family side of it, getting them into a whole new environment, which is foreign to them. They'd got quite accustomed to that, but they were young enough. And I think it's also helped them to accept change and deal with change. So getting into that, I was fortunate to have a really good management team in Gloucester Rugby. We did very well that year. We won the Power Gym Cup. We came top of the league that year. We had a phenomenal success on and off the field. So that really tightened up. You know what it's like. When the team's winning, it's successful, management, everyone's happy, everyone's prepared to listen to ideas, and that allowed me to do that. I'm sure it would have been different had we come bottom of the table, had things gone whatever. But unfortunately, the owner at that stage, a guy called Tom Wilkins,
over to Gloucester in about 2002, having met with the owners and the head coach, a guy called Nigel Melville. They contacted me in South Africa during having met me through the Springbok Rugby team, and they asked me to come over and work as the head physio at Gloucester Rugby. And again, it was something that I was interested in. I wanted to go and experience the world outside of South Africa, having been in apartheid throughout most of my years that I'd been there. I wanted to go and see what it was like. Also, I think that was important, as I might have mentioned. I wanted to challenge myself, having been head of various national teams, worked for rugby, which is one of the biggest sport. Football, biggest sport going to the Olympics. I felt that I needed to go out and challenge myself, and this was a wonderful opportunity. I enjoyed working in rugby. There's a special camaraderie with players in rugby teams. I think partly because of the violence and the aggression and the physicality side of it, that they have to look after each other. And it's unlike a lot of other sport. I was a footballer, soccer player growing up. And we'd never had that, but certainly in rugby you need to look after each other, otherwise you could get seriously hurt. So I was intrigued by that, and I wanted to challenge myself. So when I arrived in Gloucester, some of the issues that we had, obviously from a family side of it, is that the kids were at school. So when South Africa, the school term year started in January, ended in December. It was very different in the UK, mid-year to mid-year. And that meant that they had to go up or down a year, depending on what happened. So it was challenging for the family to do it, but they were youngish, and I must say again, it helped them to deal with change and understand change. And again, I think think that's part of what was given me the ability to move, is that once you've dealt with change and felt, hey, I can do this, I can cope with this, it makes it that much easier the second time. There's a lot of people are wary of challenging themselves because they don't believe that they can do it. They think it's going to be a failure, rather than going out there and giving it your best shot and saying, believe in yourself, I can do this, and this is what it is. So fortunately with Gloucester, on the one side, is that we had a phenomenal season. We ended up the top of the table in the regular season. Unfortunately, they just introduced a playoff system at that time, so we lost the playoff to Wasps, but we won the Power Gen Cup, which was tremendous for Gloucester Rugby. They were really a dominant team throughout that year. But come the end of the year, with all of those things, the owner had run into some financial difficulties, a guy called Tom Wilkinshaw, and I was approached to say, look, we need to trim down the support staff. And I felt awkward about it and uncomfortable, because a lot of those people had been there before I got there. So I didn't want to be the one kicking them out to stay there. I said, no, I'm going to be the one that has to go. I can't get rid of my staff that have been loyal to me and done whatever else. So fortunately, it was, again, through another contact, through a guy called Matt Yates, who is a British runner, a track runner, who used to come to Johannesburg to do altitude training, and he used to come to one of the physiotherapy, or a physiotherapy practice that I had in Johannesburg, and I got to know him really well. And he found out that they were looking for someone as head physio, head of medical department, to work with Charlton Athletic Football. And my background in football was that I played football, I understood it, I'd worked with a national team, so I wasn't concerned. It wasn't as challenging as going into rugby, which is a sport that I didn't really play growing up. And I welcomed the opportunity, because it allowed the other staff that were working within the organisation at Gloucester Rugby to stay on, and I could then move out, and it gave me, and that's how I started, and that's how I left Gloucester Rugby.
Right, and then so in terms of that was Charlton, was it, that then you moved on to? So yes. They were a Premier League team at the time, weren't they?
Very much so, yeah. With Alan Kirbishley, he was the head coach manager at that stage, and again, another fantastic individual. And I was very fortunate. My initial exposure into the EPL was to have someone like Alan Kirbishley as the manager, where I remember, as if it was yesterday, where he met me at the apartment that I was going to be staying in. He took the time out to come and introduce himself. He met me there. He did everything. So again, that just made me feel part of the family. And I think that is so important, where you can really get to understand and to meet and have a good communication with the head coach, the manager, the owner, the director of football, whatever those senior positions are. Those relationships are critical, and that started off a wonderful period with Charlton Athletic Football, where I spent about 5-6 seasons with him. Unfortunately, then I think it was typical of so many teams that they were aspiring. We were always mid-table, and they always wanted to get into Europe. They thought they could do better without Kirbishley. They thought that they needed someone that's going to take them to the next level, but having said that, I think Curbs also felt that he could do better, and that he also wanted to go and experiment, and said, I need a club that's bigger, that's got more money, that's got whatever else. And once they started introducing those changes, things went south. And he went to West Ham. We had Pardew coming in to Charlton Athletic, Ian Dowie, those things, and things just didn't work out. It was a different dynamic. Things didn't work out. For whatever reason, they then got relegated that season. And just prior to the relegation, one of the staff members, a guy called Nathan Gardner, who was a sports scientist and physio that had gone to Tottenham, they were looking for a head of medical at Spurs. They approached me. I went for an interview, and again, I was very fortunate to land the position. Damien Kamoli was a director of football at that stage. They did all the interviews. I went there, I got accepted into the role. And here's quite a funny story where I'd never met the manager, unlike Curbs at Charlton, before my first day at Spurs. So I thought it was going to be as comfortable and as cozy as it was. Martin Yole was the current manager at Spurs at the time. And I remember, again, very, very vividly walking into the office the very first day that I was there to introduce myself and say, hi, this is who I am. I walked into his office and this guy didn't know who I was. Martin had no clue who I was. And I started introducing myself, and the next thing, he just cut me off and he started talking in Dutch to, the assistant coaches and whatever. I think what he didn't realize is that I could understand Dutch because I was South African. So I don't want to repeat what he said in that meeting, but I had this tough decision to make. And I actually stopped him. I said, excuse me, Martin, could I leave? Because I understand what you're saying. I understand Dutch. And it was amazing, the transformation. His face changed. And he actually, I think from that day, trusted me. Because instead of me being quiet and not saying anything, he said, Wayne, that's it. Now, okay, let's talk. Let's get on with this thing. I understand what it is. So again, it's that having that relationship that I mentioned earlier, and that ability to be able to talk to people and be honest and transparent. And we had a great relationship. Unfortunately, he didn't last that long, as a lot of Spurs managers don't seem to be lasting at the minute. But wonderful, many eight years at Tottenham. I was there the last time we won in 2009. I think we won the Carling Cup at that stage. We beat Chelsea and things like that. So there's some fantastic memories, some really good times. We were also moving into a new training ground. So I was instrumental in helping develop that, set up a new training ground. And it is a truly phenomenal training ground. They put a lot of effort, and credit to Daniel Levy and everyone else for funding it and for having the vision to say, let's not cut corners, let's make it the very best so it stands the test of time. And that's always a challenge, Andy, is when you're in those positions to say, how do I then go and structure this thing? Because when I started in physio as a sports physio, it was myself and a doctor, sometimes not even a doctor, it was myself. So I was the doctor, I was the nutritionist, I was the massage therapist, I was the sports scientist. You had so many roles that you had to play within those organizations. And looking over the course of time, over 10 years, how that had exploded into, just so much support staff. And you look even today, what's happened. Those are the things that I think, then to try and say, what are we going to look like in 10, 20 years? If this is what's happening now, are we at the tipping point? Is it going to go up again? It's trying to balance that, because if you bring in too much space, you then have people wandering around and you lose that cohesiveness, the sort of togetherness that you want. People then drift into different things. So that was a challenge. And again, I learned a tremendous amount from that experience about helping to set out the various areas and that. But I think, as I stressed earlier, having some wonderful staff that were specialists in their own areas, I gave them the authority and to make decisions for their zones. They just had to bring their ideas to me, and I had to try and make the flow work. Because, like I said, silos was something that was very prevalent in sports teams. It was my job to try and bring all these different departments together and say, hey, sports scientists, hey, physios, hey, massage therapists, nutritionists, strength coaches, whatever. Let's work together. Let's make sure that we actually work together and provide the best support that we can for the player, rather than one trying to prove he's better than the other, or the others are doing the damage and blaming each other when things go wrong. When things go wrong, we all take the fall. When things go right, everyone benefits from that. And it's giving recognition when things do go right to the people that have made that influence, and empowering them to make those decisions. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I've learned through my management time, is how to bring those people together, and how important it is that they listen to each other and you allow these people to voice their opinions.
Yeah, there's a load of questions that I've got from what you've just said there. So just going back to when you went into Tottenham then. So when you're getting offered the job there, I guess it does change from role to role. But like, so you're in negotiations with Damien Comolli. Like, does he talk about what the manager wants, or is the medical team siloed at that point in Tottenham?
No, I think, I wasn't aware that there was a slight rift and sort of miscommunication between the head coach and Damien. I understood when one person, they spoke as an organization, because that's how I like to do. I represent everyone, not in different silos. And I think clearly there were silos going on at the moment where there wasn't agreements or whatever else. And that was what it is. I think at that stage, directors of football weren't very common. They still aren't today, and that was years ago. So that was really one of the first ones that they've had a director of football making a lot of the big decisions. But my naivety or whatever else, I assumed that that was indeed the case. So I understood what he said was what the organization wanted. This is what they want. This is their striving, and this is what I wanted to do. So the challenging position again is that putting yourself in those positions. It's finding out I've got to report to a director of football, and I've got to report, importantly, to the head coach as well as the players. So trying to keep everyone happy is not the easiest thing in the world. Where a coach wants a player to play because he's got to win, where a director of football wants to protect that player because it's an asset for the organization. So they may not always be on the same page, but it's how you get those messages and the transparency, and that's the delicate part of it. And that's, I know, and I sympathize with a lot of my colleagues that are in similar situations. It's a tough ask. You have to make sure that you sort of get it right, that you're open, you're transparent, that you're not seen as taking sides. Because the minute they think that you are siding with one or the other, that's when the trouble starts. So yeah, certainly in those initial things, it was, again, unfortunately, Spurs had, I don't know if you know, there was a young boy that had a heart attack in Belgium. One of their players, the youth players, he came back and he had associated brain injury damage with that thing. So there was a lot of, again, it was in the early days of where staff weren't really CPR trained. They hadn't done a lot of this thing, and there was a lot of expectations. They'd only just started doing testing and things. So there were a lot of questions to be asked, and a lot of pressure put on the medical staff. Because in hindsight, obviously the organization's experts, I said, the medical staff, that's your responsibility. So they want to change. And that was what caused part of the change and for me to go in there. So they were very interested or very keen for me to make sure that didn't happen again.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So, like you say, director of football is still relatively new, and it's not in a lot of different clubs, and like the dynamic of how the club operates, it seems to be pivotal and making a big difference. So, and then in terms of like developing that training ground, which again is very impressive, and Tottenham have really invested on the infrastructure of the club and so on. So when you were taking the role, was that part of the project? Was that mentioned to you or sold to you as you were going to have a direct involvement in that?
Yes, indeed it was. And that it was interesting because I thought that was imminent. It was going to be in 2 years. It took about 4 years 5 years before we even got there. It's on paper they can put things out, but it takes a lot of planning and a lot of time and a lot of work that's gone through that. So yes, it was certainly part of the initial discussions where they did ask my input and whether I felt that I could cope and manage some of the things, and I was comfortable in doing that. I'd planned my own physio practices in South Africa. I'd set up managing things within different sports. So I had a good understanding. I'd traveled quite extensively by that stage, so I'd seen different setups, and I pretty much felt that I had an idea of what we needed. Fortunately for me, it took longer than what they anticipated, because I was able to learn and understand what it was to Spurs, what they needed, how the academy worked, how you mix the academy with the pro teams, how they separated, but an understanding and all of those things. So there was a lot of insight that, again, I was just completely blind to because I hadn't been there long enough. And I think had I gone in there, I probably wouldn't have made the decisions that we ultimately made. You need the time with that. You need to see that.
Yeah, I can see that. And again, just going back to that, the Martin, you're on the manager thing. Like, one of the things that I know that certain clubs have tried to introduce is that the medical team is not, like, when a manager leaves, a lot of the time you'd see the whole medical staff go. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think it's possible to have a medical team that is separate? Although you're saying silos isn't good to some extent, do you think it should be that way for medical and that coaching staff?
I agree completely that it has to be that way. And I think we need to be separated out and somewhat protected in a way from the head coaches, from the medical staff. Certainly, I think the new manager can bring in someone as maybe as a fitness coach or someone, and they often do, the assistant coaches work on the fitness because they've got a certain style that they like and understand their drills and everything else. So you need to be able to, be like a chameleon, you need to be able to turn around and see that. And maybe it's, again, part of the background is that you have to be flexible. Not every player wants the same treatment, massage, depending if they come from. The French may more like electrotherapy, other people like hands-on treatment. So you have to treat accordingly to what the player wants and what the expectations are. It's likewise with the coaches. They don't have the same approach. You know, some of them have got a very hard-nosed approach to players. Harry Redknapp with Gareth Bale, for example. You know, Gareth only became successful because Harry was determined that we weren't going to run on every time Gareth Bale fell to the floor, because Harry at that stage felt that Gareth was going down way too easily. And he refused to allow me to go on the field when he was down. He said, no, he'll get up on himself. So again, it's understanding the dynamics, the peculiarities, and winning the trust of the head coach, but also understanding that you are looking after the assets of that organization of Spurs. And that's the most important thing. These players, Gareth Bale, another example, he was signed from Southampton for, I think, 10 million or whatever. I can't remember the exact figure, but he got sold for an astronomical sum at the end of it. And I think that's part and parcel, obviously, to the coaches developing and giving him the opportunities, but also the medical staff looking after that individual. So if you've got a good medical staff, and I should say performance staff, to include the strength coaches, sports scientists, everyone else, that needs to be there. They are your back staff. And I've always argued that it's like a Formula One racing team. If you don't have the best team available to look after that car, you're not going to perform. And that's what we did. That was the approach that I used throughout my career, saying, let's get the best together. But then you're ultimately reporting to the owner because you're looking after the asset. And if they can do and they trust you enough, you know, I've had many tough conversations when it's come to signing windows and signing players, where a coach is desperate to sign a player. I might think that player, through the medical information that I've received from the specialists, is a risk. I've got to give that risk, and it's rather saying sign or don't sign. It's a case of, this is what we perceive as a medical staff, as a specialist, saying going forward, and then it's for them to sort out. But again, rather than siding with the one and saying, I don't think I should sign him, it's just say, this is what it is. I'm in risk management here. It's like your investment. You come invest something with me, there's a high risk, it might work out, but equally it might bomb out completely. And it's just putting that as unemotionally as possible, as with many facts, and just saying it's not a personal thing. I'm not doing it because I dislike or like the player or whatever else and want to be friends with them. I'm doing this to the owner or to the thing. Here's the information, and trying to get that information to them at the same time. Because if you give it to the one before the other one gets it, there's every chance that they contact the other one and say, this is what have you, and he said, and because he hasn't heard, they then become defensive immediately. So it's making sure that you've got to be very careful just how you send that information, and communication then becomes a big part of it. And those situations certainly taught me how one should be communicating with the hierarchy, and obviously with players.
I think that's really interesting, because again, as a fan, I am, a big football fan, is that the conception is that it's a fail or a pass. They failed the medical, but that's a really good way of presenting it. Whereas you're presenting the risks, and even acknowledging there may be a potential problem, or there is a problem, but it's up to you if you want to sign him. I'm just letting you know what the position is.
Yeah, and again, that then, once you've established that form of communication, the same thing happens. Forget the signing, but if the decision for a player to play, we've got a Carling Cup final, we've got a big man. This is either going to get us in the top 4 or not. This is going to get us into Champions League. This is going to get us into Europe. We've got to win. So you've got to understand that you can't go there and dig your heels in and say there's no way he can play because there's a 30% risk of him getting injured. You've got to be able to say to the coach, and specifically to the player, because he's the one that has ultimately got to agree. You've got to empower them and say, this is what I'm going to be telling the coaches. I think there's a 30 to 50 to 70 to 80 to 10 to whatever the percentage chance of, and it's not in exact science. That's the art. It's not exact. And you're saying, this is what I believe your chances of getting injured. Maybe it's a case of restricting time on the field, not playing as much, changing position, change the style, but that's again for the coaches to decide. I try not to influence too much of that, but again saying, I think he can withstand this amount. Here are the facts. You guys make the decision rather than us make the decision. And that's helped again smooth that communication issue, potential communication issues that you may have with coaches and with players. Because if you're telling a coach that this player can't play without telling the player, and the coach has a conversation with the player, and the player then says, but I can play. I'm fine, coach. I'm going to play. Then the coach comes back to you and says, I've just spoken to the player, and he said he's going to play. Now, be aware, and as you know, that the players are often going to try and please the coaches. They will often say, because they feel they don't want to say to a coach, I can't play. So they need us to be strong. So you need to know your player, and you need to know and say to the player, this is what I'm going to tell him. And you tell the player, because I know that the coach is going to be behind our backs, go and talk to that player, so that at least he's protected and say, right, Wayne spoke to me, this is what he thinks. So he's on the same page. So these are the little things that are beyond the skills of the therapist in treating. You can be an outstanding physio, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the best in an environment like that, where you're having to be part of the decisions, keeping people happy, bearing in mind you're with them 24/7, 4 months on end.
Yeah, politics is involved in everything, isn't it? So this is great. Yeah, it's really good insight. So have you had any particular managers, whether you want to mention names or not, that you've not had that rapport where they've liked what you've said, or they're just like, no, you don't tell me, I'm going to dictate?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've had several. And again, that's part of what you have to try and deal with as the back support staff. That's exactly what we are. And it's, again, you've got to leave your ego at the door before you go into the building. That's over. They're going to shout, they're going to do whatever else, because they are under tremendous pressure to get results. And if the results go wrong, they're going to look for someone to blame. So often it's the medical staff. Players are injured, they're not fit enough. So depending on what the situation is, they're either going to be said, we're not big enough to condition them, or we don't have the right players. So the performance department come under a lot of scrutiny throughout the season. And it's, again, it's just how you try and manage those situations and say, look, okay, this guy is going to play or is not going to play. And I think that's, again, coming back to communication.
So one thing that you always see as a fan, like the manager gets sacked, the new manager comes in, and it's right, the players aren't fit enough. So you're managing that whole process. So I'm sure you've read and seen that before. So, like, have you experienced that sort of thing where you read in the press, oh yeah, I'm going to come in and they're not fit enough? Like, how do you manage that? Bear in mind you're managing the whole sports science area.
You have to, and you have to accept it. And again, it's about the ego thing, is that you've got to leave that behind. Because again, there are different styles, as there are many different ways to treat back pain. There are many different ways to train and to have sportsmen and teams fit. So depending on the style of play is going to influence what they do. So again, rather than me judging it, as I'm there to support. If that's what you want, this is what it is. But again, it's making sure that, even though we're giving advice on what the training programs are like, it's the coach's decision ultimately. And if they feel that you're supporting them, that's okay. So there's a couple of rough rides, but they just want to see that you're there to support them, and not to say, oh no, we used to do it like this. This is what you should be doing. This is going to go wrong. You there provide as much support as you can. When injuries come on, it's not about saying, okay, I told you so, or whatever else you see, you should not have done that. You've just got to pick it up. And you just got to say, okay, well, let's deal with it. My role is to look after players as much as I can, provide as much support. Again, there are coaches that, not just on the fitness side, they don't want players to be lying around in the treatment tables. They want to actively discourage that. Other coaches like that. It creates a good camaraderie. There's communication within the locker room and the treatment. So you've got to try and find it out. And it's how you find those things out quickly with coaches. And see to them, okay, what is it? What's your style? There's occasions I've made mistakes because, that's what I thought was right, but I accept that. Again, as I said, there are many, many different ways to skin a cat. And it's, again, if you stick to one way, and the only way that you're going to treat back pain is with acupuncture, you're going to get success, but there are going to be many, many times where it doesn't work. And you've got to be able to be flexible and say, okay, well, let me move on. The player doesn't like acupuncture, he doesn't like needles, he doesn't like whatever else. Or this player absolutely loves it. Or he comes and tells me that this is what I want. And even in my heart, I know that this is not the way that it should be done. I have to abide by that, and hopefully over time, educate them, expose them to techniques that I've, in my experience, found to be better. That gains the trust. But if from day one you refuse to do something, you're not going to survive in this profession. Because the player, ultimately, he certainly believes he knows what's right, whether you think it's right or wrong. You've just got to try and educate them. And, I know I haven't touched on it, but education becomes a big part. Coaches, players, front office. You can't just say, no, you can't play. You've got to explain what that injury is, what it means, what the healing time is, what this medication is going to do to them, what this procedure will do to them. If the more educated they become, the easier it is for us to communicate. The less you actually spend time with them trying to explain what it is, why he's got the hamstring injury, why it keeps breaking down, it's going to keep repeating itself because you're not changing anything. Until they say, okay, well, maybe my training method, maybe we shouldn't go in for full out sprints the day before a big game and doing things. You know, it's just putting that information out there so that they can aware it and say, hey, this is what we're finding. This guy may have, he felt it tighten up the day before. It's how you word that. But ultimately, the responsibility is on educating the coaches and the players.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because it's great to get the insight of all the different things. Like the physio bit is kind of that's a small element.
Yeah.
And then so you mentioned that example about Gareth Bale and Harry Redknapp. So like, how does that come about? Is that just a very blunt thing that the manager says, right, don't do that with him, or how did that come about in that instance?
Well, it's, Jeff Scott, who's now head of the department at Spurs, who's been there many years, tries to run on the field, and Harry goes berserk and won't let him on. So that's happened. We saw it in Chelsea, you know, with Mourinho previously, where they go on, they get blamed for certain things, and sometimes that's how you learn. You know, it's not a case of, okay, these guys bring in their do's and don't lists. It's very much learning as you go, accepting that. Again, I'll stress, put your ego in the back door before you get into the building. You're going to take it, but then standing up to it, and don't be offended by it necessarily. You can challenge it by all means, but stand up to them because they respect that. That's what this business is about. They're there to win. They want the best out of it. And if they can trust you, they're going to listen to you more and more. So there are times when you just have to stand up and not say, oh, and I'm not going to work for you, I'm upset, and then you start bad mouthing off to the players, because that information is going to get back to the coaches. You need to support and say, hey, Gareth, let's do it. And he became a phenomenal player. Part and parcel, I don't know, but that was what was happening, and that's how we learn on the job. And again, the message to young physios is accept that you're going to be pointed out, you're going to be shouted at by coaches who don't know much about medical, but then it's our responsibility to educate them.
And so in that instance then, does the manager take responsibility? So if like Bale in this example, if he says, look, why is no one coming on? Does the manager be like, well, no, because I've said? Yeah,
that's exactly what it is. And unfortunately, at that time, the player ended up with a stress fracture in his foot. So, but it's a case of, you know, if you cry wolf too many times, something gets happened. So it's about toughening up players. It's elite sport is extremely tough. There are so many kids trying to get into sport and so some of the very talented kids may not be the most resilient or the toughest, and they don't have careers because they can't deal with that pain and things in that there. But there's a fine line. But again, it's that whole process, and not then shoving it in Harry's face and saying, this is what happened because you didn't allow it on. So, okay, well, let's try and work with it, guys. Let's try and get better. This happened because you kept rolling around as if you've been shot by a gun when there was nothing wrong with you. That's what happens to that. Let's change that narrative. Let's change that. Then the coach buys into it. So you're not blaming him. You're not running to the owner and saying, this is what happened because of that. You know, it's happened. Whether you ran onto the field or not is immaterial. Obviously, you had to come off shortly afterwards, but you know, that's just what happens.
Yeah, no, really interesting. I mean, it makes complete sense when you explain it, but I guess that's part of the art, isn't it? Is being able to see that and, like you say, not have the ego to feel like you've got to be running the show. So no, really interesting. So yeah, so then you've been at Tottenham. So we'll come back to some people that you'd worked with there. But how did the move to America happen?
This is bizarre. I actually thought I was being conned at one stage with this thing, because I got a phone call leaving a game on my way home after a Tottenham game by the owners at that stage. It was at Miami Dolphins. Oh no, sorry, my apologies. At San Antonio Spurs, the basketball. They were looking for someone again to replace their head of medical department. Things had gone wrong with one of their top players again, and there was a blaming. You said that, he did this, I did that, whatever else, but whatever they wanted to change. So they asked me to come, and I was interested. I said, hey, an opportunity to go work with the NBA. San Antonio Spurs, who's one of the all-time greatest franchises in the history of sport, with Greg Popovich, who's been one of the longest-serving coaches in all elite sport, and a phenomenal individual. So I thought that is an experience I've got to try. I've got to go out and see how that works out. So I went over there, and the weird thing is that I went to, and then I met with them. It was great. Everyone was very happy with the situation. They wanted me to come and work with them. I was then taken to have a look at some houses in the area by a woman called Katie, who I then found out her surname was Tottenham. So I said, no. I'm going from Spurs to Spurs, and I'm seeing Katie Tottenham. No. I'm being stitched up. This is a serious stitch up going on here. So anyway, we dealt with it. So she took us to an area in San Antonio called Arsenal. And I'm saying, no, this is too weird. There's got to be something fishy going on here. There's something really strange happening. All right. So anyway, I had a fantastic time. They were a brilliant organization. They still are today. RC Burford, who was again their sort of main guy in the front office, he helped me out, and at the end of it, they pretty much offered me the job when I was on the way back. But in America, they offer you a job and say, right, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. That's how it works. I said, hang on a minute, you guys. I'm stuck. I'm still in the contract at Tottenham. I'm not going to leave a team midway through a season. It's going to take me a long time to get into the US because of visas and passports and everything else, and get my physiotherapy recognized over there. I had to go and sit exams and do everything else again. So that's the process. I can't just be up and move in 2 weeks' time. So unfortunately, that fell through, or fortunately, it fell through, because then they contacted a good friend, Mike Tannenbaum. RC contacted Mike Tannenbaum, who was working with the Dolphins at that stage, and they were also looking for someone. But they were actually on their way to play an NFL game at Wembley. So I met with the owners of the Miami Dolphins then in Wembley when I came back, and they offered me a job, and they had a bit more time. They said, look, okay, we can see you in February or more, of the following year, which gave me ample amount of time to then go to the Spurs, to Daniel Levy, and explain my situation to them and say, look, this is a wonderful opportunity. I'm really keen. And again, that was NFL football. So the next thing I knew, I was going into Miami, and I was knocking on the door, one of the biggest franchises in the NFL history, and trying to understand a little bit about football. So that's what happened with that.
So yeah, what was that like then? So did you go over to Miami after you'd met them at Wembley?
Yes. So then I went over to Miami, and they were going to put me in a similar position, because again, they also had these silo issues where they had the strength and conditioning sports science department in one silo, and then the medical athletic trainers, everyone else in the other department, and they wanted someone to bridge that over. And because of my experience of working with that, they wanted someone outside of the US that had that experience and that background to come and work within that organization. So that was the job description at that stage, and those were the plans. Unfortunately, when I got there, now I remember the first meeting that I had was at the NFL Combine, because I flew in at the time of the Combine in Indianapolis, and I went into weather which I think was about minus 17 degrees, and I said, I wonder if I'm doing the right thing yet coming into America. But we met with the NFL, the hierarchy there, and they said no ways are they going to support this structure. So they have a strong influence on how the job descriptions and how people, they didn't want someone that was potentially biased towards the strength and influencing the medical side of it, even though it was medical. So my performance director role wasn't on paper so much as an overseeing thing. Again, it relied on communication, sitting the two heads of departments down, the head strength coach and the head athletic trainer, saying, listen guys, I'm here to try and bridge this. Let's work together. I'm going to give you your autonomy in your various sections, but let's try and bridge this rather than working in the silos. And it was fantastic. That was, again, the experience. It was similar to what I explained in rugby, because of the pure physicality of the NFL. These players have got a bond like is unknown to any other sports teams. The harsh reality of the NFL is that a lot of those players only have contracts for 2 weeks. They don't get bought and sold. There's not a value to that. They get traded out and they get sent out, or they just get axed and said, right, that's it. Obviously, their franchise players get substantially more amounts of money, but for a lot of those players, they're having to play. And can you imagine only playing 16 or now 17 games a season? That's all you play, 16. So if you lose 2 or 3 games, the impact that it has on your probability of making the playoff is massive. So having all of that experience and saying, wow, this is the pressure on a game day of so few games with such a high stake, was again exhilarating. It was something where rather than playing football where you're having so many games there, you just arrive, okay, we've lost 2 or 3, we'll pick it up again, we'll go back again. This didn't happen in the football and in the terms under which these guys worked. So they had to play. Andy, could you imagine if you risk losing your contract with a sore knee or an ankle? You are going to play. And I recall, again, one of the vivid recollections is walking on a game day, my first game day, and seeing about 6 or 7 players with an IV drip on them, before the game, getting fluid hydration put into it. And I went nuts. I said, well, you can't do this, guys. This is you're not allowed to do this. The WADA, what is it going to, this is drug, this is doping. It's an offense to do this. No. They have their own American thing. That's fine. We can do that. So they trying to understand and the injection and things that were going on there. But, a phenomenal group of players. It was a tough sport. We would fly, on an aeroplane to the games. They'd have 5 buses waiting for us to take the players and staff. We'd travel with about 160 people to a game. The equipment guys, if anyone in football or soccer is working and thinks they're busy, they should try working American football where you've got helmets, gloves, and the weather conditions there are extreme. Playing in Buffalo, whatever else, where it's freezing and it's snowing, you have to have on the side benches these thick coats. You have everything. So the amount of equipment that these guys had to do was phenomenal. And then it was obviously trying to understand the positions, because it's a sport where it's all about set plays, literally everything. So the players need to know up to 200 different combinations of plays and sets that they have to go through. The offense comes on, the defense and offense and special teams and things that they're going there. So again, having some experience in rugby, I sort of got to understand the physicality side of it. But what I didn't realize is just the precision and the absolute dedication to working that these guys had, where they'd arrive at the facility at 6:30 in the morning. I'd start my treatments, and they'd leave at 7, 8 o'clock at night. And they'd have meetings in between with their own groups, like the running backs or the wide receivers. They'd have their meetings, and then offense and defense would meet, and then the teams would meet. And then they'd go through video, the cutting, the breaking down of video, the taking it to the level. It was a complete next level for me of just how much detail they were going into that. Equally, going into the weight room and working in their gyms and seeing the weights and the power that these guys have was, again, incomparable to any other sport that I've ever seen. These were giants. And again, look, they're bursts of energy. So just trying to get your head around just how much weight that these guys are lifting. It brings me back to going to the combine, where, again, the combine, I don't know if you're aware of what happens in the combine, but it's all the college athletes, or not all, but a selected 300 or so college athletes go to the combine every year. All the teams go back there and they scout. So that's how you do your scouting. And then you get your pick for the draft. And then they have a look and they interview players and they do whatever else. But these players need to go through various tests and to say, okay, what are we going to do? How are you going to select this player? And looking at the speed, these guys were breaking Olympic records with the vertical jumps. Because you could imagine, if you've got talent like that and you can jump vertically, are you going to become an athlete or are you going to become an NFL player? So those guys go to the NFL. They have a bench press situation where you do 100 kgs and you bench press your maximum. How many reps? What would you think would be a reasonable number of 100 kilogram bench press?
I wouldn't even like to guess on that. Yeah.
So I saw a guy do 50. You've never seen. But it was like the weirdest thing. It was like the closest thing to, like, almost like back in the slavery days, where they'd march these guys up and down in their underwear, basically, because they'd look at their arm width, they'd look at their physique, they'd be measuring them and seeing these. These were the most phenomenal athletes that I've ever seen. It's 50 states, right, in the US. That's basically equivalent to 50 countries that can select 300 players to come into their group. So you can imagine the talent and the size of these guys. It is unbelievable. And it was just such an eye opener for me. It was just, I think my jaw was hanging, to the floor everywhere I turned. I just said, I've never seen anything like this in all my international careers, even in professional soccer, football. I'd never seen anything like that. So that was really, I'm so thankful again to having been exposed and having worked within an organization like the Miami Dolphins and having witnessed and seen just how dedicated these athletes are. But that's a price. They get hit hard, and they hit hard, even with that protection. And in Miami, you got the humidity and the temperature. So we are doing training, and the game lasts about 3 hours, where you at that stage, it was about sometimes up to about 90, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And you got the humidity of about 90. These guys were losing 20 pounds in a practice, because if you've got a helmet and gloves and everything else, and you're standing outside in the boiling heat and training and sprinting and colliding and doing things, the impact and the toll on it is tremendous. So the heat stress alone was something that we had to do. We had air-conditioned benches on the side that the players would come and take a breather just to try and bring their temperatures down.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Do you think, in terms of like those athletes, then is football, American football, is that like the number one sport? So basically, are you getting the cream of that talent pool, do you think?
Pretty much so. I think it's close between that and basketball. Seeing some of the talent there, I think the guys that maybe don't like so much of the physicality side of it prefer the basketball side of it. But the passion and the love for American football is immense. It's a national sport for them, without doubt. And having the national anthem played before every game, and the jets flying over things, it is incredible. And fans and that live for that. They live for their games.
Yeah. Now I've been to a couple of NFL games, and they are like different level of entertainment. And the way that it's set up there, it's hard to get a ticket, isn't it? Let alone anything else. And in terms of, like, do you notice any difference between the athletes then? Like their college system is different to football over here. So did you notice any difference in terms of, well, academic background for one? And I'm sure that they'll get, if they're really good, they will obviously get them into the university scheme.
Yeah, and that's, so I'm divided, but more tending towards pro college, US college system, where the athletes go rather than the academies per se. So getting these guys into colleges, educating them, it develops the college. It creates a great competition levels at the various colleges. These guys can compete at a fairly senior level before they get then drafted into some of the professional teams. So instead of having academies, they would just go from college to combine, to draft, to the NFL. That's if they make it, right? So again, the fact that they would help with the education, I think, is an important thing, rather than stripping away the education. I know a lot of the EPL teams, and certainly at Spurs, they were very pro. They had classes for the younger kids that come in at under nines, that they make sure that they with the education, they do as much. Again, the good thing with the NFL was that the player engagement, that get them on MBA courses, they do a whole lot of things to try and further their education as much as possible. So that was very strong in the NFL, just how much they looked after each individual and said, right, your future, the average career in the NFL is 3 years. I know it's a lot longer for a lot of people, but it's only 3 years, because majority of them, when they get in there, they don't make it beyond a year.
Right.
That's it. They just get burnt out. They're basically there as training people for the next group, and that's all they do. They're never quite good enough to go there. So, if you make it beyond the first year, you're probably going to make it a lot longer than 3 years. But unfortunately, a lot of them get shunted out after a year. So the education is a big role, an important thing for a lot of them. And again, it's up to the athlete. Not all of them choose to go that direction, but they're very good. The player engagement guys that I worked with in the Dolphins were extremely impressive, extremely active with the players, making sure they were involved and got them opportunities where they could.
And before we move on to like your next move, like, why do you think they approached you? Like, you had 2 US teams interested. Like, why do you think they were speaking to you?
To be honest, I'm not really know. I know Mike Davison, who works with the Kinetic. He's been around. I've been working with him and sort of in between, and we've been good friends for a long, long time. And I know he was instrumental in the first sort of putting my name forward, because they were doing a global search. So he put my name to RC. RC contacted me. I went over there, and you know, that's what came of that. And then when I couldn't do the Spurs gig the first time out, RC passed my name on to Mike Tannenbaum. And as I said, they so happened to be coming to London, Wembley, to play at Wembley. So I think, again, fortuitous, right place, right time, but also willingness to go out there and push myself and challenge myself and see, can I deal with this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So then what happened? How did it come to an end at Miami?
Again, RC contacted me again about after 4 years in the Dolphins. Says, hey, Wayne, we've just moved on from the person that we brought in. You know, when we wanted to sign you, he's going back. He was going back to Australia. Would you be interested? No, initially they said, we're looking for someone. Can you recommend? So I gave him a whole lot of names. I said, absolutely, RC. I've been in contact with him for a while. That's the least I could do because he'd helped me. And then after a while, they came back and said, hey, Wayne, what we actually meant is that, would you be interested? And I said, look, you know, Mike Tannenbaum, you know, I'm very happy. I'd always, you know, it would always be a dream to go and work basketball. I'd love to come and work with you guys. But, you know, I owe it to the Dolphins. I'm very happy here. I want to continue with it. So he spoke to Mike, and it was fine. It resolved very amicably. We're still on very good terms. It wasn't an issue with that. And it comes down to that ability to communicate and to put it up there and not just say, right, I'm leaving, I'm out of here, I'm on to the next best thing, because you don't burn bridges in sport, and in life, in fact. And that's the other thing, is that make sure you maintain it, you respect what they are. You go to them and say, these are the situations, I saw out my time with them, I helped them get the next position in place. And then I moved on to San Antonio. And that was in 2018.
Right. So then, like, what was that? Because you mentioned about the short season in terms of the number of games. Then basketball is the other end of this. Well, it's not quite baseball, but it's the other end of the spectrum.
You're spot on with that, 100% right. So, yeah, that was, again, where I'd gone from a sport where they'd played 16 games a season and practiced day in, day out for months, to a team that played month in, month out, and then very seldom practiced. So I think, on record, they may have had only 17 practices a year. They almost had as many practice sessions as the Dolphins had games, but, you know, the number of games that they had is 80. So it was, you know, it was a different thing, getting onto an airplane, flying across there, getting into a city, time zones, 3 o'clock in the morning, getting yourself ready, getting up the next day, preparing for the game, playing, getting on a plane, traveling to the next city, whatever. So that was a different dynamic, really tough. You needed a good cohesive group of staff, again, performance, because if you're with those people all the time, you want people that you get on well with, because that's all you ever see. You don't see family. I didn't know what day it was. It was either game day -1, game day, or game day +1. So that was my week. You know, that's pretty much how it worked. And I was there when obviously the COVID situation hit, and we went into the bubble and played in Orlando. That was quite an experience, again, bringing all the teams into one little group. And again, it's just in the US where they're able to do, they turned Disneyland into this mega basketball arena. They had several arenas there. All the teams were positioned in different hotels, and they just isolated, they cordoned the whole area off. So we played in our own little bubble. And they had these fantastic courts. They had medical staff. They had everything. They had food. They had everything organized. Testing. We had bands that tracked us. We had everything. They did a great job. I was very impressed. So that was something that, again, you know, taught me just how the Americans can deal with situations like that, and at the scale in which they can work at. It was unparalleled to anything that I'd seen. My last season with the San Antonio Spurs, again, we'd lost quite a few games through the sort of ongoing COVID situations. And the second half of my last season, I think we had to play 40 games in 68 days. So we never had more than 1 day off between games in those 40 games. In 5 occasions, we played 5 games in 7 days. So again, it's just teaching us, where I thought, oh, you know, you can't play every day, you can't do this. These guys would get up, and it's how you coach them, how you deal with it, what happens before the game. You know, there's they have like little quizzes. One of our athletic trainers was super good at it. Every time you'd have these questions and he'd get the players to try and guess, like general quizzes or whatever. It was a lot of fun, but you'd never do that in a football team. You'd never do that, certainly in American football and EPL. That would be, what are you doing? But you need to engage these guys because it becomes such a habit and such a routine that you've got to try and get them up for each and every game. But equally, you lose one game, you just got to get on with it. You've got to move on. You've got to shut that off. You've got to learn quickly, and then you've got to go back to the next city. So those are the little things. The players, because there's, again, a smaller number of players, I was able to give more individual attention, is what I prefer. Unfortunately, to the football, where you have so many players on your rosters, you have 50 players. You can't give them the attention that I like to give them, that I thought they could do. You just basically were patching up, moving on to who could do what. That was it. That's all the time that you had. But the beauty of the basketball is that you work with these elite athletes, and there's a handful of them. So you're dealing with 13, 14, 15 on a game day. I might see 6 or 7 just before that. Each player's got his routine. They come in and do their set works with you. You do that, and you get to know them really, really very well. And you can plan the recovery. You can do those things because you're dealing with smaller numbers. You're not traveling to a hotel in 5 buses. You're traveling, with 1 or 2, if that. So there's pros and cons to both sides. But again, it's just allowing yourself to be exposed to the different sports and finding out what you prefer. And as I said, I preferred moving around and challenging myself, where a lot of the people that I've worked with had been at the clubs for years and years, and kudos to them. It's not easy staying there and being through all the changes and things, but they become really specialist in that one individual sport, where I was fortunate where I could learn tricks of the trade all over the world.
Yeah, unfortunately, if you've got a load more questions on these, but I'll try and get through them quickly. So in terms of that then, so basketball is, from what I see, they seem to play on until they're quite old, certainly the high level ones, like LeBron James, I don't know where he's at, Kobe Bryant, obviously RIP, but he was playing at a very high level at the end of his career. Like Tim Duncan was Spurs. Like, you've got players that they do play on, and yet they're huge guys, they're playing so regularly. So how do they do that? Like, are they really patched up when they're playing?
Yes and no, but I think it's also because of the individual attention that they can get, and the emphasis on recovery. So a lot about what you learn there is you have to upskill on as much recovery on the flight home, what you're doing, compression garments, whatever else, and you do it quickly post games. You ice tubs, you do everything else. So there's a lot more emphasis and need on the recovery on the individual players. We had a great sports scientist, the head of sports science, Chavi Schelling, who's taken over my position, and he would basically work out how much the players were playing, doing that, workload situation, acute and chronic workload, and talking to the coach and saying, hey, these guys, we need to restrict his number of minutes. And again, the coaches would say, okay, we're playing a team where we think we can afford to rest some of the star players, but these are the games that we want to win. This is what we want to play. So again, there's a lot that attention to detail, and not just playing each player for 48 minutes consistently. You've got to play them, you've got to manage them appropriately to do that. So there's a lot more management coming from the minutes, the loading that they're doing, how they're feeling, reporting accurately. Again, because you've got such a small team, and you have a coach like Greg Popovich who's very interested. He talks to players and he doesn't want to risk them. He's not a coach that's saying, we've got to win this. The players' health comes first, always. Right. Obviously he'd want them to try and play, but he does respect that. So he was fantastic at listening to us, listening to the players, and saying, okay, well, this is what I think we need to do. And again, the beauty of that is he's trusted some of the bench players to come on and do their job, where some of the other teams, they just played out their top players all the time until they're fatigued towards the end of the season, and then come playoff time, these guys were exhausted. And then the bench players hadn't had enough opportunity to play, so they were rusty by the time they came to play. So it's like managing all of those things, is that don't burn out your players, use them sensibly, bring them out even when they're still fresh, even if they want to do a little bit more, just manage them. And that taught me a lot about recovery, management, time management, etc.
Yeah, really interesting. And during the time that you were there, the Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary came out. So bear in mind, you're on the inside. What was the reaction within the Spurs like when that came out?
Yeah, I think they're very supportive of it. They understood, they know the background thing, and there's sensationalism to a lot of those things, but they know the egos and things that go on with it. But I think the messages that came from the last dance for me is that the background and the dedication that these guys have to put in, and the competitiveness and what it takes, because one player can influence a team significantly more in basketball than you can do in football, in soccer, in any other sport, because there's those, if you've got a LeBron, or if you've got a Jordan, those players can make a massive difference to what it is, and they need to be leaders as well. And it can very quickly go south if they don't get on. If the leaders don't lead, you've got problems. You're sitting with serious problems within that team, because you can't sideline them, because that's what it is. So they are very powerful in that sport. And I think it was just, they know it. They know that some of the things were made, obviously, for the case of sensationalism and making stories and doing whatever else. But the truth behind it is the background that these guys come from, and the work ethic, and what they've got to do in order to win championships and to sustain it, to be at the top level.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the best shows I've ever seen. I think that I absolutely loved it. It gave really, really good insight. And then this is a question that, so it's kind of a two-part question. So one thing, my friends are always talking to me about what we do, like selling medical devices to teams. But everyone just assumes, right, these clubs, Tottenham Hotspur, you're kitting out this place. They just assume that there's an unlimited budget in medical departments. First question is, I know that that's not the case, and you've got to justify for these things. And so there's that one. How is that budgeting from someone building a sports science and medical department? And then secondly, how does that differ from the UK to America, if at all?
Okay, I think so. The first part of the question, certainly it's a big part of the role of the head of the department, is the budget. So again, you have to things approved and whatever else. And again, it's through education about and validating certain instruments and things, because there are clubs, and there's certainly is a pattern of clubs throwing money at various devices, but then not fully understanding how those devices work, not having properly trained people to work with those devices. So it's all good to have the glitz and the glamour and everything else, and the fantastic pieces of equipment, but if you don't know how to use it and you don't use it appropriately, that's not fortunate enough to be able to then sorry, Andy, I lost you for a bit. You're back?
Yeah, no, you're back. Yeah, we caught that.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. So yeah, and again, as I put a budget together, it wasn't an endless budget, and I'd have to propose things, and that worked across the board in the US, and then in all my experiences, that to budget for things. But again, if there was good reason and you could show that there was a potential for helping people, then definitely. Now, again, it can be influenced by managers, their experience with certain players, your top players coming in and say, right, this is what I've had, this is the treatment that I want. We introduced Pilates at a very early age, where it was still unheard of almost back at Tottenham. We started with a lot of those things. And again, that sort of took on and it became more and more important. So we'd invest in reformers and everything else that came on. We had EPI, which is electrical percutaneous injection, where that almost like a cathode injection into an area and stimulate that area and to promote healing. That was a Spanish thing. And from Barcelona, and then I went and did courses with that. And because of the coaches that we had at that stage, that's what they had heard, and they'd had good experience with that. We had to go out and explore these different technologies and techniques, and then bring them back into the club and see how they work. So, yeah, certainly, I was very well supported throughout, but it definitely wasn't an endless budget. And I think that's important, because otherwise people just buy and there's no accountability. And certainly you get a reputation really quickly if you're going and buying pieces of equipment, strength equipment, and it gets used for one day and then doesn't get used again. Certainly the financial directors are very aware of what's going on. But if it's well used and the players are happy with it, then you get all the support you need. And that's
Yeah, no, it's a good answer. No, I think that's good insight on that as well. And then finally, then, so it's going to be a difficult one for you because you've already gone on for ages in terms of like you have so much experience. But who are the people that you would say have been most influential in your career or life, even?
Yeah, I think the first one is my wife, Jean. She's also a physiotherapist. So she had to give up a lot in order to follow me all over the place. So she set up practices, and then I said, "I know I've got a job in Cape Town. I'm going to the Sports Science Institute. I know, okay, give up her practice in Johannesburg, go and help me set up a practice in South Africa, set all of those things up, and then no, I've got a position in Gloucester. Then move all the way to Gloucester and do that." And then start working in one of the NHS hospitals there and really loving it and wanting to do extra stuff. And then saying, "Oh, no, now I'm going to London," and things. Then she's set up a practice from home in London, trying to get that established, and that really very, very well. And then the next thing, I was off to the US. But and that's unfortunately where her career ended, because becoming a physical therapist in the US is not just walking in there and waving a little certificate and say, "Hey, I'm a graduate physio from the UK. Please." I did additional courses. It took me about a year and a half to get the qualifications. And Jean just said, "No, I can't be doing this and that." So certainly, I think she was, the back support for me, understanding what it is, and willingness to move different countries, experience different things, and the sacrifices made on our kids and our young family. That's the hard part of sport, as you know. You sacrifice all your weekends, the time away. That's it. I'm not going to be there when my son's first football rugby game is going to be, my daughter's first play, her first netball game. I'm not going to be there because I'm with the team. So you lose out on so many of those things, and you've got to be prepared to do that if you want to make headway in the sport, unfortunately. And that's not for everyone, and everyone can make their choice. So, Jean was certainly a big influence in my career. Tim Knox, sort of the legendary sports scientist in the UK and South Africa, in Cape Town. He was very challenging in what he does. He still is today. He sees controversy wherever he can, and he will challenge whatever people consider as the modern, that's the debate on whether VO2 oxygen is the most important thing to limit performance. He goes and says, no, it's a peripheral thing, it's a muscle rather than that. And that's his whole life. So he taught me to question the fundamentals and not just accept everything that you're told. So that was the beginning of it. And then there are numerous people, that gave me the opportunities to work in sport. Ishmael Yakut, who's unfortunately passed away, he was the doctor at the Springbok rugby team. He was a great influence in my life, certainly in South Africa, gave me the opportunities, got me into the international sports, and gave me the belief in myself. He said, you can do it. And, I'd question myself. I said, I can't go to all Africa Games, Commonwealth. I don't have the experiences. You can. I will help you. So you need people in your life that are prepared, that believe in you enough to support that. And then coming into the into the UK, Mike Davison, who I mentioned earlier, has been a great friend and a big support of mine, giving me opportunities when I've needed it. So thanks to Mike, that a lot of these things did transpire. And then going into the US, Mike Tannenbaum and the RC Burfords, who again believed in this person who had absolutely no clue about the sport, but was open to it. I didn't try and pretend I knew everything. And again, I think that's what they liked. They didn't want someone trying to come and say, well, they clearly knew I didn't know anything. The players knew I didn't know anything, but that wasn't what it is. So they actually quite welcomed that, rather than they thought that I judged them. They just said, okay, Wayne's here to help me. He will learn, and I did learn, and I loved the sports, and I got involved as much as I can, and I try to teach myself as much as I can with those things. So yeah, I'm sure I've missed out several very, very influential people, but those are the ones that come to mind.
No, brilliant, really good to know. I really appreciate your time on this. I think you might have got the record for the longest chat that I've had here, but well worth, because you've given a really great insight into just like the business of sports physio as well, which I think I'm always fascinated by it, being a massive sports fan, and certainly I like American sports as well as the Premier League. And no, that's been really good, sir. I really appreciate your time in giving that up. And now you're based in Wales. You're down the road from me in Manchester, so I hope you're going to be able to get over at some point.
I'll definitely arrange a visit and come down, and hopefully whatever I've said might inspire some young guy somewhere, some mentor, someone to believe in themselves and say, I can do this, I can go out there. Given my background in South Africa, to have been in 3 continents with multiple sports and do things, and that was nothing I ever dreamed of. But I'm scared of having, as I said, to set a dream, because that's what you aim for. So I didn't have any limits on what I was aiming for. I was just going to do the best that I could do, take the opportunities that came to me, and it's worked out for me.
Brilliant. No, I think that's a great philosophy and a great note to finish on. So, Wayne, thank you very much for your extended time today. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you soon.
Pleasure, Andy. Thanks very much, and good luck with what you guys are doing. I really support that. I think it's a tremendous benefit to the profession.
Brilliant. No, appreciate that. Thanks, Wayne.
Take care, mate. Bye.